handout. When Jennifer was showing the audiogram and then the simulation, a lot of those things can actually be found. That and more on this Wyoming Instructional Network. It's our website that we have built, that we put all the things that we love specific to children who are deaf, hard of hearing on this website. So feel free to check that out. The other things we handed out was this IEP form with some red writing on it, and these are going to be just basically kind of like notes that we're giving to you to take with you to look at. There's examples of in each one of these IEP areas of kind of look for things that don't apply to every single kiddo with hearing loss, but could be things for you to look for as a parent of a kiddo with hearing loss. So we'll be referring to that, as well as the eligibility criteria for kids with hearing loss. The other thing you'll see in front of you is a bowl with some fun little items in it, and we'll be using this throughout the presentation, having you look for certain items. And then a little baggie that has a bee on it to represent heartbeat. Because this is what we're talking about, is heartbeat. So look for that. Like each family will have a bag. It won't be necessarily for every single person. If I missed a family, like I said, there's a couple of families over here that might need a bag. Just raise your hand and we'll bring over for you. And there's multiple items within that bowl for each table to share. So after I've said that, now let's talk about, so let's just assume that your kiddo has finished part C, they're turning 3, they made it through, they're getting close to turning 3. Something to remember is that the team still needs to decide, is your child even eligible for part C? Because it's like moving from one program to another, right? And you don't automatically know that just because your child has hearing loss that they'll qualify for the next step, which is CARB services. Right? So how does the student even know? Do they just go, oh yeah, I think so, I just have this feeling that your child is eligible, just this cardiac, kind of assessment thing that I have. No, there's actually a process. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. The process to actually start managing before your child gets heard. That's in the regulation start. And that means gathering information, starting to get your team together, deciding which assessments are going to be conducted, observations, pulling together all of that information so that at the end of it, everybody can sit down at the table and know what that assessment data shows, and then deciding whether or not your child is eligible for part B. And remember, part B moves from the family services to preschool and access to that general curriculum, more of an educational focus. So part C to part B evaluation culture. So I want to show you this. This is something that's in the works, and that we're building for your providers. And some of the providers might have actually gotten this in their packet. It's just a draft form. It's definitely still being worked on. But we're finding that we're trying to help providers who are just doing the very best they can to follow this process that's specific to our kids with hearing loss. So providers have all sorts of kids. Of course, we focus on kids who are deaf and hearing, right? But our providers have kids with autism, kids with Down syndrome, kids with hearing loss, kids with vision loss. And they have all sorts of disability areas that they are evaluating for. So we want to help guide them on, hey, what about our kids with hearing loss? Some specific things that you can be looking at for our kiddos. So we're building this flow chart for your providers. I don't know what's the flow chart or a pamphlet or a little booklet. I'm not sure yet, because again, it's still in that form. But it basically walks through the process of, hey, what have we done first? Have you connected with the support resources that could help you? Have you assembled a team of qualified professionals? Have you obtained the child's current hearing levels and hearing device status? Have you determined which areas you want to look at and give them some ideas? Conducting a comprehensive evaluation, which we're going to talk about next. And then, hey, have they qualified? Do they need specially designed instruction? What? Yes, they do. No, they don't. And then like the steps to that. All right. So this is still being built, but we think it's going to be a really strong guide for our providers. And right now, it's in the we're getting feedback process, and so we're getting feedback from the field to see how we can do this.
And we call that stakeholder input.
And it's actually been great. I've already made changes to it based on supervisors who've gotten back on that. Because they just think about, when you're working on something for so long, Well, I can see things far away, so not close up. Because you know, I turned 50 a month ago. Go back here. How many of you received that flow chart in your folders from feedback? Some of the providers got it. So the next step that we want to talk about is the comprehensive evaluation. So within that process, one of the huge steps is the comprehensive evaluation. And within your little bowl, if I'd like you to kind of dig in your little bowl for the wheel. In your bowl. And hold that up high when you find it. I use the wheel as a representation of the comprehensive evaluation. Again, you're welcome to dig in that bowl. There's more than one wheel on the bowl. As the comprehensive evaluation wheel. Because what I'm going to share with you is the assessment wheel. And Billy handed out to you an assessment wheel in front of you. This can go in your Part B bag because this is a reminder to you that you want your child to have a comprehensive evaluation. If a wheel is missing a piece, is it going to roll? It's not going to roll. If it's missing little components, it's not complete. Just like an evaluation for your child, if it doesn't have all the pieces, it won't be a complete evaluation. All right? So that's the first thing that goes into your little Part B bag. When I talk about the comprehensive evaluation, just so you know, I own about 50 pairs of these. They are all over my house and all over my office, and my child has learned to bring them to me every time. So this is another tool that we've developed. It's an assessment wheel. It looks a little different than the one you have in front of you, only because I took off all of the assessments that are around it. But when your child is assessed for Part B services, they'll go through an evaluation with your Child Development Center. And the Child Development Center has certain assessments they need to conduct as part of their work. Okay, they might look at motor skills and cognitive skills and fine motor skills, speech and language, things like that. This is like an addition to that. This is like, hey, we're not to know all that. Kids are like, let's look at some specific things about that are related to our kids with hearing loss. These are areas that have been identified as best practice areas to be looking at with our kids with hearing loss. Okay? So, hey, have they looked at listening skills and speech perception? How are our kids hearing speech? How are their listening skills? Have they looked at that? That's important for a kid who going into preschool. How about independence and self-advocacy and device use? Are they using their device? Do they know how to tell a person when the battery is dead? Can they say, hi, I hear you? Can they repair communication? Can they move to a better listening spot? All of those things are important. Those things might not matter as much at home in Part C, where they're in their comfort zone with their family and everybody can guess what their child's needs. It's a whole different world when they come to preschool and they are a little fish in a big pond. Explain repairing communication. Things like if your child missed something and didn't hear it, do they just let it go, or do they say, what'd you say, or huh? Or do they try to repair it in some way? How about language use and processing? How are they using language? Do they have pragmatic skills? Can they use social language? How about social skills? You know, our kids with hearing loss, what I find as a teacher of the deaf, especially when I was teaching K-12, is my kids would come to me as kindergartners and be developmentally socialized behind because they missed all those incidental learning things that their hearing peers had been hearing. Okay, so a lot of my students were immature and they hung out with the littler kids. You know, our second graders hung out with kindergartners because that's where they socially were. Not all of them, but a lot of them. How about their sign language or communication skills if they're using sign? What's their communication like? You know, it's very specific for kids who are deaf or hard of hearing, you know, versus a typically hearing child. So again, the center has their tests that they need to do for their processes, and we're asking them, hey, take a look at these other areas. These are pertinent to our kids with hearing loss. And so this assessment wheel that you have in front of you is a tool that we're providing to providers. And you'll see the assessments that are listed all around that wheel. They pertain to each one of those areas. up on the other side, it actually just links where those test lessons can be found. And they're either free or they're online or they're in the library where they can be borrowed for free. Okay? So those are just, we're giving that to you so that you can maybe know when your providers talk about that, or you can actually bring that information to your providers.
Okay, thanks, Christy. So after the comprehensive evaluation is complete, the team comes to the table, and that includes the parent. There are certain providers that are required to be at the table. Some that can explain the results, parent input. This is all very important. Classroom observation, coming to the table, so maybe you can go and find the table.
You'll either find a table, you'll find a chair,
Oh, yeah, the chair.
or a bench. Something that represents you and your providers coming to the table.
And to remind you that you have a place at that table. You're part of the team. Every decision in an IEP meeting is a team decision. So we have the federal law, and then we have what the state establishes. We can do more than what the federal law says we should do. We cannot do less. We come up with what is called hearing impairment eligibility. So a student, in order to have an IEP, it has to be two-pronged. You have to have, obviously, the hearing loss, but you also have to have the need for specially designed instruction. And that's what brings you to the table. We already know the student has hearing loss. How do we determine the specially designed instruction? That's where your assessment comes in. So can you dig in now and find the two prongs? Yeah, so dig in your bowl and you'll find two prongs. Don't poke yourself. Sorry. Yeah.
And that's your representative, that's your representation, that when you look at that two prongs, you know, okay, my child needs to meet both of these.
Yes, because when we need sometimes, and even Hanson Voices has input into this, some parents will say, my student's not qualifying under Part B. Why? You have to meet the second prong under the federal law. Does the hearing loss impact the educational access need, whatever for the student, that second prong? Now, I would gather, or I would think a lot of you do, but don't take my opinion. The federal law says they have to meet both criteria. So we now have the two prong. The hearing and eligibility form is also there, the criteria form. So this is what IEP teams use to determine it. This is what's called the Wyoming Chapter 7 rules. It's in the books. And that is, they have to meet, the qualifications under that, which most of your hearing impaired kids do. So what are we up to next? Oh, yeah. So, yeah, that's the hearing loss impairment. So this is a big example of the eligibility criteria form. And these questions have to be checked off by the IEP team. So that's how we come up with that. And you'll see when we get to the IEP where that eligibility category comes in. So,
and you have this handout, we handed this out to you. You'll see this when your child is evaluated.
Yes. So prong 1, does the child have a documented hearing loss? That's your medical report. Prong 2, does the child need specially designed instruction? So what is specially designed instruction? That sounds like really cool. It sounds like I am the queen of the classroom, right? So specially designed instruction means adapting as appropriate to the needs of an eligible child's content, methodology, or delivery of instruction to address the unique needs of the child that result from the child's disability and ensure access to the general curriculum. So that's what specially designed instruction, different from maybe a typically hearing, a normal hearing child. What do we have to change? What do we have to specialize that instruction to so that that hearing impaired child has access to number 1, language, and number 2, reading eventually. So,
and I'm just going to give a little example. Like specially designed instruction could be something like, do they need extra vocabulary help? Do they need to have some pre-teaching and post-teaching of information? Do they need to have some sign language instruction? Those are things different than maybe a typical hearing child might need, that deaf child might need.
Yeah. And all along, you're just trying to level the playing field. It's a communication access issue. It's a civil right to be able to hear. It is a civil right to be able to get a language. Yeah, it'd be nice if we get 3 languages, but it's a civil right. It's also a civil right to read. So it's always protecting that child and trying to adapt what needs to happen for them to have access.
Do they need an FM system? Do they need a teacher for that? Do they need an interpreter? Those are all things.
And those are things, again, everything links back to the comprehensive evaluation, everything. Because if you don't have that information, you can't bring that to the services that the student's gonna get. Okay, so if yes to both prongs, the child is eligible. If parents accept the services, and remember, we can't go too far down this road. You don't have to accept an IEP, but that's a whole other conversation, a whole other training. Hopefully you do. And then the IEP is developed. So,
Right. So you moved from an IFSP to an IEP if you qualify for Part B services with your kiddo. So we're going to also talk about later what happens if your team comes to the table and says, hey, we did all this assessment, but we don't see that your child qualified for Part B services, then what? We'll talk about that at the end. Right now we're going to talk about if your child did qualify for Part B services. So are there any questions so far?
and I also want to know, do we have students on an IEP in here? You've been through the IEP process. Okay,
Great. Very good. Offer any input you guys have too.
Yeah.
As we're going along. So we're just going to be talking about some look-fors on the IEP for a child, for children who are ages 3 to 5 who are deaf or hard of hearing. So in your bowl here, I'd like you to look for a little magnifying glass. There should be a little magnifying glass in there.
is she the cutest teacher ever? I love it.
A little magnifying glass for your Part B, so that you know, the eyes will be for later. So that you know that there's some look-fors in the IEP that you are going to be looking for as a parent. That's from your child's IEP. If your child qualifies for Part B services. And Part B services go to 21, so even some of you who already have kiddos on IEP have been through the transition process can use this information for your older child.
And if you don't understand the IEP, there's no, my financial advisor always says, don't do with your money what you can't explain to a fifth grader and have them explain it back. I kind of feel that way about advocacy for our kids. If you don't understand the IEP, you're signing a document that may not benefit your child, or you may feel like you didn't have input into. So you need to be able to be that advocate. Yeah.
So when you meet with the team to write the IEP for your child has become eligible and you're sitting down to write the IEP, the one thing that we've been trained as Department of Ed employees is that the IEP should tell the story of your child. Should tell the story of what your child's needs are. So find the little book.
Christina, I just interrupt for a second. Jane's pointing out a captioner. It's I, E as in egg, and P as in Paul. Not IUP.
IEP.
Yeah.
So there should be a little doll book in there. And this is a reminder to you when your child enters Part B services that the IEP should tell the story of your child. Anybody should be able to pick up that IEP, including you, and be able to read the story and understand the story of what your child needs.
And we always say too, to a provider, what if that student moves to Montana tomorrow? What is Montana going to do with that student if it says as needed, or if it's a very vaguely written document? If you don't know what's in it, it's going to remain a vaguely written document. You want them to be able to pick up that story and read it and know what to do with your student.
And true story, I've looked at IEPs in agencies that I went to see this child who was deaf or hard of hearing and looked at that IEP, and I would not know from the IEP that child had hearing loss because nothing is documented within that IEP that shows me that. And that didn't tell me the story of the child. That needs to be in there. Okay? So the difference between our slides today and this handout that you have is this is just notes for you of like little look-fors. Again, doesn't mean every child has these little notes, but this is for you to take home and look for. We're just basically reviewing each page just to give you an idea of what an IEP is. Okay. So this would be like the front page of your IEP. Have any of you seen this, or does this look familiar to some of you IEPers out there? Okay. So there's the Wiser ID that travels with. You'll have a number that your child is assigned, and it'll follow them all the way through until they graduate. The disability category will show deaf or hard of hearing if your child's disability is deaf or hard of hearing. And then you list their strengths, educational concerns, and preferences. This is usually where they say, what do you think, Mom or Dad? What are your concerns for your child? And tell them what they are. If you're worried about their reading, or you're worried about their social skills, or if you think they're a really great drawer, this is where you put it. This is the PLAC, the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. Basically, this is the start to the real story of your child. This is where they lay it all out on the line, right? Over here are our little notes, specific and individualized for your child includes the effects of the disability on the child's progress. Describe the current performance. Identify your child's strengths. Identify their needs. Statements have to be supported by data. Basically, this is where your team says, hey, we have this assessment data that says your child maybe is a little bit delayed in social skills. That's where it needs to be written down, okay? Hey, we noticed that when we were observing your child, we noticed in playgroup, they were really looking around for all the kids' faces to see what was going on. This is where you would write that down, okay? Hey, we noticed your child didn't move to the front to get a better listening position. They sat way in the back of the room, and they probably missed the information. That might be something you need to work on. That would be here. Also here is information about the hearing loss. This is where we should see the child has a moderate to severe hearing loss, wears 2 hearing aids, maybe only wears them 3 hours a day. We're going to be working on that. We're doing an FM trial, a personal FM trial. This is where that would be listed out, even for the kiddos who are already like in first grade, second grade, third grade.
And just a comment, the F for functional is everything non-academic. So in my world, that's how with the hearing aids on, how does this student hear in the sound booth without and with the hearing aids on? That's the functional part. That's important for me, and of course it's important for classroom people. And I can't remember what else I was going to say. Oh, so the flap is really every place mentioned in the flap, or everything mentioned, needs to be a thread through the IEP. If it's mentioned in the flap, we got to see some follow through in the IEP.
Yeah, so for example, if your team writes in the flap, the child needs a personal FM, okay? But nowhere in the IEP under technology does it say that that child has a personal FM. Okay, that isn't connected. That needs to be connected somewhere. So just some ideas of some things that might be in the flap. The flap should also contain information about ways that the hearing loss is affecting the child's ability to participate and make progress. And these are just all different ideas, like how is the hearing loss affecting all of these just regular things that kids do? And be thinking about that. The plaque should also contain information about the hearing loss, which we just talked about. The type of hearing loss, the technology, how they're using it. Are they using it? Are they not using it? That's all.
And the way they're going to find that out is you're going to have the medical report, and you need to be able to explain it. You know, is it bilateral? Is it unilateral? Is it sensorineural? Is it conductive? The more you know about your student, the more helpful this part of it is.
And so when I look at this too, I think, who's the expert in deafness who could really help my team figure this hearing information out? Who would that expert be? Other than the parent. I mean, the parent obviously is the expert on the child. Any ideas of who else maybe could be a really important member of this team? Someone, an audiologist?
I love you.
Who else?
The teacher of the deaf.
Teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing. Those are 2 experts that you could rely on to be a part of this team, right? That could speak to the hearing loss piece and the effects of the hearing loss on that child. So consideration of special factors. This is also in your packet, and we've added some notes about what that really means so that you can read that on your time as well. But basically, special factors are just additional considerations that we think about specific to that disability area. So just some important things for your kiddos might be the communication needs. You know, how are your kids communicating with? Do they need special sign language support or cute speech or whatever? Do they need opportunities to communicate with other kids with hearing loss? Is the child blind or visually impaired? Does the child require assistive technology devices or services? Say your team meets, say your child turns 3 and your team meets, right? And your kiddo doesn't have a remote mic or a personal FM system, but the team says, wow, I really think that they would benefit based on this audiology information, based on our observation that we saw of them in the classroom. They would really benefit from a personal FM system. Let's check yes, but the kid needs it, yes. Then that becomes the responsibility of the center to provide that technology for your child. You shouldn't have to go out and buy that out of pocket for your child if the team deems that that is something necessary for your child to benefit.
And if consideration of special factors is checked, it has to be addressed in the IEP. Janine's trying to tell me something.
I just want to clarify what an FM, I mean, FM is awesome because, once again, it's the distance and noise. And
Yes, no, you're right. Yes.
So if something is checked here, then yes. So if the child has communication needs, oh yes, the child uses sign, check. They have communication needs. The team needs to go, okay, how are we going to provide communication needs for that child? Does that child need an interpreter? Does child needs a teacher of the deaf and signs in the classroom, what does that child need to support that communication?
And it all goes back to the comprehensive evaluation.
Now, so again, any item checked yes must be justified. Extended school year. How many of you have heard of extended school year? Extended school year is not summer school. Extended school year is education that might be outside of the regular school day. All right? And it's not just about if a child has regression, like maybe they go home for Christmas break and then it takes them a while, they kind of fall behind and then it takes them a while to catch up. It's bigger than that too. It's about, are they being provided with some, the specialized training that they need at home? Do they have that opportunity? Do they have, do they need a special routine? Do they need special communication that can't be provided necessarily in the home? All of these considerations need to be thought about for ESY. Now, if your child has an IEP in the fall, and your team says, oh, they're not gonna need ESY, check, no, we don't need it. It really should be revisited again in the spring, because a lot changes in a year, right? You don't know if your kiddo's gonna need ESY. And ESY can be before school, can be after school. Maybe your kiddo needs some specialized tutoring with the teacher of the deaf. And so I have teachers of the deaf who go to school at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they do their ESY with that student before school starts. And some kids stay after school to get ESY.
Kids on lunch hour.
Some kids go on lunch hour. Some kids they might go for let's say a month during the summer, and then the rest of the summer they're off. Some of them might come 3 days a week. It's all individualized for what your kiddo needs.
And if you as a parent notice regression, you have to bring that up to the case manager, to the teacher, to the provider, because you spend the most time with them. And it could be like, it's may not be every year of their life, but if there's a point where you're a parent notice regression, you bring it up to the school.
And you can ask for an IEP meeting to talk about this. Exactly. They would like to talk to you. Because the providers, they want to do the best. The teachers they want to do what is right for your child. But they need you as a team member. So measurable annual goals. These are the goals. Okay, when you meet at the table and your team says, these are the things that we noticed your child might need support in. Vocabulary, pragmatic, self-advocacy. Based on that assessment information, your team writes goals. And they say, okay, these are the goals we're gonna write for your child. Let's talk about it. What do you think? And then they want your input, and you give them input. And you make this goal. Johnny will, this is just an example, Johnny currently uses one-word utterances to express his needs. Johnny will use 2 or 3-word utterances to express his wants and needs with all adults in the preschool classroom or something. That will be his goal for the year, all right? And each one of those areas, if your team has concerns about use of technology, behavior, language, whatever, that is a goal. That becomes a goal for your child. And that's what is being worked on. And you should know that that's part of your child's story.
And the academic goals address very specific skill deficits compared to typical development care. That you can't just say Johnny's going to be better, or it has to be from the comprehensive evaluation. What did we identify that is very specific to this deaf part of your child to maintain or perform in the curriculum?
And a goal can be about self-advocacy. It's not just about reading and math, or numbers or colors. It can be whatever your kiddo really needs. And on this handout, you'll see we gave some ideas. So progress reports, I know we're running, we've only got 10 minutes, so I'm just gonna go here. Progress reports, you should be able to have information from your providers as often as hearing kids get their progress report to you. And the progress reports should be very specific, not just, oh, Johnny is so happy, he's doing a great job. It should be, Johnny is now using 2-word utterances with familiar people. It's specific about that goal. Oh, we have more time. I'm going to talk much more slowly. Any questions about that? Any of that so far?
Chrissy, I was not muted in this one because I was talking over here. When we talk about progress, also lack of progress needs to be addressed, which I think she probably said, but I always look at what if after the first month the child reaches a goal? We're just going to stop there. We're going to reconvene and we're going to think about how do we move that goal forward, because sometimes kids do reach that goal early. So it's not just regressing. We don't progress both ways, if they're not reaching that goal. Or have they exceeded it? And then what do? We just set them in there and keep doing the same thing? No, we
Right.
And let me just also point out too that the goals always are based on the assessment information, right? So say your kiddo isn't a sign language user, but boy, you really like them to learn how to use sign. If the assessment data doesn't show that your child needs sign language in order to benefit from education, then that really wouldn't become a goal, because that's not, it just might be something you might like I would love for my child to learn how to clean his room, but I can't write a goal about that, even though probably the assessment data would be very clear that my child who's 21 still does not know how to clean his room, right? It needs to be based on that information.
Educational benefit. What the IEP is about educational benefit. So in doing this PowerPoint, I learned what a gobstopper was. Do you guys know what a gobstopper is? Because you have to find it in the goal. And it represents this.
So finding your
Christy
goal,
had to teach me.
it's like a jawbreaker. If you watch Willy Wonka, the everlasting gobstopper,
Hey,
so you have gobstoppers. Because a gobstopper has layers, right? It has layer upon layer upon layer upon layer.
yeah, and the layers that are represented on this are, how does this all look when we talk about special education, related services, general curriculum? So you'll see general curriculum is the center of the gobstopper, and that is what every student is exposed to, the general curriculum. How does that special education student, what are we doing for them? That's the specially designed instruction. That's the next layer of the gobstopper. And then the first layer of the gobstopper are related services that will, I mean, not all students have related services. What do we wrap around that specialized instruction to general curriculum to help keep them successful in the classroom? And we'll go over related services, but this is how it looks. So you can't just have a related service without the specially designed instruction. It's all of one package, and those specially designed instructions that surrounds that general curriculum, and then we wrap it around with related services if they're needed. And we'll also go on to supplement related services as we go along. So on the IEP form, this is where we list our specially designed instruction. That could be, and we have an ESY block there as well, but the area of specially designed instruction could be
Anything that a licensed specialist
Yes.
provides for your child, like a teacher of staff or a special ed teacher
Yes.
or a speech pathologist, if your child isn't identified. Yeah. So like your vocabulary development,
Yes.
sign language instruction, self-advocacy, social skills, these would be listed here, and then your professionals over here.
And then frequency is how long, how many times a week, how long you're going to do it, where it's going to go. That's very important. And then the projected start date. So that's all part of the special education thing. That could be 4 lines filled, it could be 2 lines filled. And then are we going to do those services in the extended school year?
Right, because if they're just hitting it out of the park on social skills and they don't need ESY, they wouldn't have that check for that particular area. But maybe in language they would.
Yes, so the supports needed for the child to progress on their IEP goals, this is the area of specially designed instruction. What are we doing different for that student, the specially designed instruction? So this is one of my favorite pages because they're alphabetized, so audiology comes first. Yeah, I have such a big ego. So the related services, remember, they're going to wrap around, they're going to be the supports that are needed for that student to benefit from the special education services. The audiology really is just an example, but the regs, the federal regulations allow it to be a related service. Personally, I would prefer that to be on every IEP of a hearing impaired child, because if you don't know what a child hears, how do you serve them? If you don't know, I prefer on an annual basis, but I will tell you with littles, I was replacing ear molds every 3 months. The FedEx guy and I were like best friends. And just about the time those ear molds, you're turning them around. Under the age of 5, I was replacing them every 6 months. So audiology is related service. I'm not saying that the school has to pay for the ear mold, but they do need to know evaluative. What does the student hear? So we have Betsy here, who's really trained in behavior. If she walked into a classroom and the teacher said, this hearing impaired kid is off the wall, what is the first question she's going to ask? Where's the audiogram? Where's the functional piece of the hearing? What do they have access to? Because how can she determine it's a behavior issue when we don't even know what the student's hearing? And if we think a student is going to come and say, Miss Betsy, I got sent out to the hallway again because I was missing my high frequencies. Do you think it's a program in my hearing aid? Maybe my cochlear implant's not mapped right. They don't have that auditory maturity. That's our job. We're the adults. They're the kids. So I can't even comprehend someone who would not want to know what the hearing is on an annual basis, or if you have suspicion that it's dropping out. Hearing loss can happen at any time. There is no book on hearing loss. You can be born with it, it can be late onset, it can be genetic, meningitis, cytomegalovirus, head trauma. There is no book on it. So I like audiology-related service because we need to know what they're hearing. It's a civil right to have access in the classroom. We can't just assume, oh, the hearing aids are on, so everything's fine. I can tell the glasses are on, and I can tell the glasses hopefully are working. My husband's an eye doctor, and he's a good eye doctor. But I can't tell the hearing aids are working. And do you think your child can say, I think the battery's dead. This is getting a little staticky. I bet that's why I got in trouble today. They can't. So I am a proponent of having audiology-related service on every IEP.
Even for kiddos with cochlear implants.
Yes.
Because we need to know functionally what they're getting.
That's the functional piece.
Even if a kid goes to Denver for their cochlear implant mapping, they can still go to a local audiologist or a pediatric audiologist or Cali for her to figure out the functional piece.
Callie is like the best audiologist in the state. And now, somebody sue me, I don't care, because she is the best audiologist in the state. So, sue me, I don't care, I'm 62. Yes, Betsy.
I'm a parent, so I don't have to say it. Callie is the best audiologist we've gone to in 15 years.
So sue Betsy, not me, okay?
And in the Cheyenne area, we have Katie Saban. Yeah, Katie Saban's amazing.
I just think knowledge-wise, yes. Equipment-wise, versatility, information-wise, her. She just has all the equipment. She has all the equipment. I mean, the kid can be asleep and she can tell you what they're hearing. Yeah, it's magic. And she has the sound with, and she's right here in Casper. But I digress. The point is, if audiology is a related services in the IEP, and it should be, it's the school district's responsibility.
Now,
It's the center's responsibility.
and again, this goes back to assessment too. Like, if you look at this and go, oh, I really like my child to have some physical therapy. Well, was that part of the assessment? Is that what did the assessment show that your child needs that?
Yeah.
Yes or no?
Yeah,
It
and
has
so,
to be related to your assessment.
yeah, and so people will say, well, I can't get my eyes checked every year. Well, it's not in the regs. Audiology is in the regs. And it is critical to know what that child has access to. It's a violation of their civil rights if we don't let them have access. It's a communication access issue. And if we don't know what they're hearing, that's not fair to the child. Kids go to school because they want to go to school and be a kid. We're the adults. Their paycheck at the end of the day is their self-esteem. Our paycheck might be monetary, it might be, I don't know, whatever else paychecks are. But they don't wake up and say, I hope I fail today, because if I don't hear everything, I'll get sent out of the classroom. Yes, they don't do that. They want to go to school to be a kid, they want to have friends, they want to be successful. They don't wake up and say, I really hope I get in trouble again today. But they will if they can't have access. So it's critical to know that.
I think something to talk about too is the parent training. That's something that you can talk to your center about or your school district about. If there's specialized training that you need as a parent in order to provide support to your child for them to benefit in their goals and their program. That's something to talk about too that could be provided by your center or your school district. Oops, and then going back to, I think we talked about that again, just how they wrap around.
Yeah, how they wrap around. So.
Yes, an interpreter is on there as well. Educational interpreter, parent counseling, speech. I mean, any of these can be checked. These are just ones we see most often for kids with different needs.
Yeah, it's a one time a year for 60 minutes. That's about how long it takes. Unless there's 3 and then you get over really fast. Okay, so now we're up to the supplementary aids and services. Oh, this is yours, Christine.
So again, in the handout that we provided for you, we have little notes about each one of these like examples. Doesn't mean that your kiddo needs every one of these examples. It just gives you ideas of what that might look like. So supplementary aids and services is another piece of the story that you'll see about your child in the IEP, and that just means accommodations, aids, services, assistive technology, other supports provided to keep your kiddo in the classroom. or with their peers, their human peers, all right? And,
Can I just say one thing?
Yes, I'm
So
sorry.
supplementary aids and services is where you put the FM system. Because here's what I know, I just can't shut up about this, but anyone with hearing loss, it doesn't matter if it's fluid behind the eardrum, if it's permanent hearing loss, you cannot filter background noise, period. You will never be able to filter background noise. I don't care how much you pay for those hearing aids. It happens at the brainstem. Your FM system brings that voice clear and consistent to the student every single time. And if it's needed at home for educational benefit, that's where the FM system goes. And an audiologist will gather the data to support the fact that as soon as I introduce noise that's equal to the speech or a little, and the kid can't repeat it back to me, that's your data to support an FM system, which is critical to get into an educational audiologist like Katie or Callie. Because again, if they don't have access to it, it's just not fair. And so even if it's, a mild hearing loss, we say, well, it's just a mild hearing loss. They cannot filter background noise. It happens at the brainstem. It's like they're in this sea of sound that all goes to the brain at the same time, and the same volume. Same volume.
And supplementary aids and services can be things like, if your child is using an interpreter, and say that child development center or the school district says, we only have an interpreter who's available 5 hours a week, so that we can only afford them for 5 hours a week, so we'll provide that interpreter for 5 hours a week. Well, maybe your child needs it, so your child only can learn for 5 hours a week, No. If the team decides that that is what that child needs, then they would have that supplementary aid and service. They would have that FM support. They would have all those things to support them as the team decides. And also with the supplementary aid service, it could be accommodations like, closer sitting, because I guess one more thing.
Okay, supplementary aids and services is also where you put your hearing aid checks, your instrument checks. So, okay, the hearing aid's on, how do I know it's working? And we're talking auditory maturity of the child. Again, a 3-year-old's not gonna say, I think that program in my left hearing aid is, I think I need to get in, see my out. They don't know that. The brain doesn't know that with these littles. They just wanna be kids. So, we check their instruments. The school checks their instruments. Families check their instruments. Just because they're on their head doesn't mean they're working. Again, it's an access issue. Yes?
I have a question. So, with this being on IEP.
Hang on just a
Okay. So with this being on IEP, so is the teacher the one that tests the equipment, make sure it works properly? Now, are they required to fill that out? And how do we even get proof from the district that they're actually testing?
That's a really good question. And I would say, now I'm going to say it depends on the child. Like, I'm not going to pull a high school kid and say, we need to check this every day, but with your littles, you definitely do. So that's a really good question. There is a form, and it's August through July, or every single month of the year, did you check it when you check it? So I'm not saying you're a bad parent because you don't check it before they go to school. Would I do it? Probably. Would I have extra batteries at the school, which is your responsibility? Yes, I would. But if it's on there, the school is required to check it, and there is a checklist that should go into every IEP every year. Do you have a question?
So all this are on IEP, right? All the, big children and they're making, turning their stuff. What if the teachers are not, what if they're not following that? What if, we'll take our kid from school and she'll not have a hearing aid. Like, oh, I got it out from PE, and you're like, me got it out from PE.
Yeah. Well, in defense of teachers, they're very busy. That's where your advocacy comes in, where
And if you're having issues, I would talk to the teacher.
Yeah.
And if you're still having issues, I would call an IEP.
Yeah.
Call an IEP meeting and get everyone to the table.
Yeah.
And talk about the story of your child and why my child needs this.
And it depends
It's all
on the
about
age of the
communication.
child. Why is she doing it? I mean, I'm old enough to know that a 6th grade girl that comes in for a hearing test that failed her hearing screening has perfectly normal hearing. So I also know that kids can be manipulative. I've had kids throw them off hearing aids off the bus into a bonfire, snowblower. So we have to say, what is the root cause of that happening? Because I'm not saying that it's not their responsibility, but teachers are very busy and kids are very wily. So I would say, what is the root cause of that? The bonfire was fun. But, and hiding it in the locker, there's a reason, and that's where you have to get to the root of the problem, where self-advocacy comes in. So we can talk more about that.
So For program modification supports, this is something that might be just different from what other kids need. For example, maybe your child maybe they're doing some testing on some sounds or whatever. Maybe your child's deaf and they can't do the testing on sounds. Maybe they have to do it a different way. This would be where that is. If they need a picture schedule, if they need something different, something that's changed. And then we talked about the least restrictive environment. Again, all these are in your notes in your IEP handout. Least restrictive environment is just what environment can your child be in with their hearing peers to the maximum extent possible, and when do they need to be filled out. So, just to finish up here, there should be little eyes in your bowl. So pick out a little eye, because this is a reminder to you for the IEP that after you go to your IEP and you get your IEP, look at the IEP. Okay? I've talked to lots of parents, and it's an overwhelming document. It's overwhelming for professionals. But take the time to look through it. And now that you kind of have an idea and you have some notes about it, look at your child's IEP. See how it's written. If there's questions, talk to your providers. They're there. They want to do the best for you and your child. But you're the important person, not the most important person on the team. What happens if they don't meet the prom, or if they don't meet? Maybe they're deaf, but they don't need anything educational. Okay. What is 504?
Yeah, so 504, I think we either have handed out a document or not. 504 is the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Section 504. It's a civil rights law. It's under the Department of Education. It affords you as a parent and your student rights for any kind of accommodations that might be necessary. Maybe they don't need the specially designed instruction, but they might need an FM system. They may need extra test time, whatever. So just know that if they don't meet that second prompt, they still have civil rights that need to be addressed. So, and that's kind of a long training, but we do have 504 stuff up here. And now Wendy's telling me we need to wrap it up.
So we have one more slide. So if your child does not qualify for Part B services for an IEP, you can talk to your provider, to your team at the table. What about a 504 for my kiddo? Okay,
Every
that's
institution has a 504.
So the last thing is that in your little bowl, you should find a rock. Because you, as the parents, you're the rock of the process, right? You're the one that even if every one of these rocks is a little bit different. Some are round, some are long, some are jaded like me. Some might be a little broken or smooth. And each one of you is different, right? But each one of you is really the most powerful person on the team.
And you are the advocate for your child.
So that's your reminder in your little part.
And you're awesome. Amen.
Any of our contact information will be in your IEP, or excuse me, will be in your PowerPoint. We'll send the new one to Wendy because we have made changes since we sent this to Wendy a few weeks ago.
And if you don't mind, you can show you what that checklist looks like.
Yeah.
It's
It's on the Wyoming Instructional Network.
Oh, yeah.
On the IEP. We'll show you where it's at.
Any questions? We're going to be
Yeah, we'll be
around.
out there. Thank you.
Thank you. I know. I didn't know what to say. Okay, we would like to thank them for this information. And it's a lot of information to take in, but it's information you will need to have as a parent. Our teacher of the deaf, where we live, kept my kids on an IEP as long as she could. She did everything. She's like, well, they need this. They still need this. So, but then we went to the 504 and it was still all good and fine. And now they're a senior and they're graduated and I'm old. Anyway, we're gonna take just a few minutes to switch the PowerPoint over. So if you need to walk around for a minute, in 5 minutes, Stephanie and Jody will go again. And thank you to these guys.